Hello everyone and welcome back to our YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Sankhya Karika's Sutra 5. Now, the Sankhya Karika is a series that is focusing on how exactly evolution happens, what is the combination between spirit and matter that creates creation as we know it. So all of these different sutras are exploring what are the pain points, where does suffering come from in this world, and how do we actually come out of the cycle of birth and death, which creates suffering, so that we can once and for all put a permanent end to our suffering in this world. So Sankhya Karika has about 72 sutras, much shorter than the Yoga Sutra, of course, in comparison, but it is much more detail oriented because it has a lot of subparts and categories to focus on. So we're going to go through the 5th sutra. We've already done the first 4. If you haven't seen it, please do check out the playlist, the link to which will be in the description. So let's get into sutra number 5 and get started. All right, so in this particular sutra, we are on the section where we're talking about how right perception or knowledge can be gained. In the previous sutra, we already looked at how we do this through the direct perception of the senses, which was also present in the Yoga Sutra as Pratyaksha Praman. Now, in this particular sutra, we're going to look at 2 more ways in which we can actually make this happen. And of course, those 2 ways are inference and reliable testimony. But as compared to the Yoga Sutra, this sutra is going one step further and categorizing or further arguing for the acceptance of inference and reliable testimony as valid means of attaining knowledge. And this is specifically being done because the Purusha and Prakriti and their primordial nature cannot always be understood directly through the perception of the senses because of how subtle they are in nature. And just because they're so subtle, we cannot say they don't exist. In fact, it's because they're so subtle that we may need to use different means of gathering knowledge to properly understand them and perceive them. So what this sutra is helping us to understand is how can you use inference as well as reliable testimony as methods of correct knowledge in order to gain the understanding of very subtle and very abstract concepts like Purusha and Prakriti. So that's what we're going to understand here, the nature of inference and valid testimony according to Sankhya Karika. So let's take a look at the sutra as always and then get into the meaning and then finally the explanation. So here is a sutra as we're going to understand it. The sutra itself goes, Drishtan Trividhamanumana Makhyatam Talinga-lingi purvaka mapta shrutira apta vachanantu. All right, so this is the sutra. Now, we have to keep in mind that right now I'm just pronouncing or saying the sutra. Chanting the sutra is a whole different ball game and experience, and it has a particular tonality to it. But since this is just a spoken word, just a pronunciation, I'm not singing it in the tonality of the sutra. But this is what the sutra is. Now we're going to start breaking it up word by word to see what the different words mean and then get into its understanding. So first of all, we have drishtam here, right? Which is perception, which is coming from the previous sutras, just to remind us of the category of what we are focusing on. After that, we have a pretty interesting compound word, which is Prati Vishaya Dhyavasayo, right? And now Dhyavasayo is because it's a continuity sutra, but if you actually just look at the word, it is Prati Vishaya Dhyavasaya, right? Like the word itself will end there. Now, what this means is the ascertainment of each respective object by the senses. Okay, so we're just going to understand the meaning and then go further. It's saying that each particular object is understood by the senses as, and then it's going forward. Anumanam. Now, anumanam, as we looked at, means inference. And this is quite interesting because even today in the Hindi language, when we speak, we say anuman as inference, as a judgment, as a approximation. So even today we do use this word and this terminology and it means pretty much the same thing. Let's go a little bit further. It says, Trividham Akhyatam. So, Trividham meaning three, right? Akhyatam, it's saying this is declared to be of three kinds. So, they're saying that the ascertainment of a different object by the senses is usually assumed to be of three kinds. Then they go further and they say tat. Tat means that, right? So now they're referring to anuman, inference, as that. And then they say linga lingi purvakam. So now they're saying it is preceded by. So what is happening here is linga and lingi are being used as two indicators or demarkers of difference. And then they're using the word purvakam. Purvakam means something that is preceded by or that has come before. So they're saying linga lingi purvakam is preceded by, so anuman is preceded by a knowledge of the mark and of that of which it is the mark, right? So these are just differentiating factors which we will understand more deeply in the explanation. But just for now, remember linga and lingi are the differentiating factors here. Just keep that in mind. Moving forward, we go to apta vachanam tu. Right? And this word has come previously as well in our sutra. And we looked at apta vachanam as reliable and valid testimony. So they're saying that, linga and lingi are part of the anumana category. But when we look at the valid testimony, we have apta vachanam. Going forward, they've added one more word here, which is interesting, which is apta shrutihi. So here they're saying that valid testimony is usually a statement of trustworthy persons or something that we can trust from a guru, someone that we look up to, our ancestors, experts in the field or a particularly knowledgeable person. And they're also reminding us by using the word shrutihi that the Vedas or the Vedic texts are considered to be that reliable testimony because they're believed to not even have come from human beings, right? They're believed to have come from the divine itself, from a divine source. So we can take that as a reliable form of testimony. Now, I want to say a few things here on a practical level and then go into the explanation. What usually happens is, and this is what they've spoken about in the explanation as well, is that today in the empirical world that we live in the scientific world that we live in, we need empirical data and facts to make statements, claims, or any kind of factual references. And what they're trying to say here is, according to this philosophy, yes, the sense perception and empirical studies are definitely a valid method of understanding or perceiving something. But they're also going one step further and saying that sometimes that is not enough. We have to use more faculties, more ways of perception that we can count on as being accurate and reliable. And so they're giving this inference through certain demarcations or marks that we know for sure that, okay, it's the most common one is, if we know that there's smoke coming from somewhere, we are likely to assume that it's coming because there was a fire somewhere or something that has set off the smoke, like a smoke machine. It could be anything, but definitely something that generates smoke is present there from which smoke is arising. So the presence of smoke is being used as a factor to prove that a smoke-producing cause must also be present, and therefore inference becomes a valid form of perceiving knowledge. And then, of course, reliable testimony and Vedas. Now, I think in the modern world, it really depends on what we believe in and what we stand for and where our personal belief systems lie. But with this particular work, they did consider the Vedas to be infallible and to be something that is the highest, right? Like this, if they've said it here, then we're going to believe it. So it's also a lot to do with faith and our personal belief systems. But academically, this is what this sutra is saying, that the Vedas can be considered a reliable form of testimony, along with those that are well versed in the Vedas or are experts and knowledgeable people in their field or domain. So that is what we're being told right from the beginning of this sutra. And now we're going to get into a much deeper explanation of what is going on in the sutra. So, coming to the explanation of this particular sutra, the most interesting first thing that we start off with is how senses perceive complete knowledge of a particular object. Now, senses pick up certain lakshan or characteristic that a particular object has, and based on its pre-existing knowledge of what that lakshan or sign means, it immediately perceives an object and records it in its knowledge system. So, for example, because we know how a pen looks, right? For example, we know. So, immediately, as soon as I lay my eyes on this, because of memory, because of my previous experiences with pens, knowledge of it, I will directly perceive it with my eyes and my sense organs, and I will record it knowledgeably as being a pen because I have some previous notions, knowledge about it, and I can categorize it correctly. So it goes to show that my buddhi or my intellect or my intelligence is being used to accurately record, categorize, and save this perception that I have had, and that is had directly through my sense organs. So what they're saying is each and every object that we experience, largely to an extent, our sense organs are, perceiving it. It all happens so fast that it's even difficult to accurately say how quickly it happens, right? Because in a particular environment at one single time, we perceive so many objects, so many things, people, emotions, objects, feelings, and things that we really just absorb it all, and our mind processes all that information, relays it back to us. But that main functionality of taking in the information comes through our senses, gets processed through our buddhi and our intelligence, and then we're able to record it, save it, and act on it if required. And the most important thing is, as we all know, buddhi is unintelligent because it belongs to the nature or realm of prakriti. And as the result, only the proximity of Purusha and how close its activating or igniting power is what makes buddhi able to cognize and process information correctly. So it is the presence of Purusha that makes that possible. Now, because that happens, we are able to record information, save it, and act on it. But if buddhi was alone with prakriti, that would not be possible. So in the text that we're referring to, one of the things that has been mentioned is because Purusha appears to possess cognition, by virtue of its shadow falling upon cognition, that means it's basically assisting buddhi. Therefore, the buddhi tattva is activated and gives us the ability to be intelligent or to have intelligence. And so the whole process of receiving, sense modification, classification as knowledge happens because buddhi is active due to the proximity of Purusha with Prakriti, and that proximity is what's giving buddhi the ability to record, perceive, and save all of this information that we are looking into. So that's the first concept that we can understand. So therefore, we are just being reminded of the power of sense perception and cognition. And then moving forward, we are now being taught about inference and how that is also a valid means of right knowledge. So here they're saying the Loka Yatika, which they've referred to as a materialist, says that inference is not a means of cognition or proper information. And this is exactly what I was mentioning in the beginning, that because of the way that our scientific minds work now, inference is not always taken as valid forms of recording and receiving knowledge. But what they're saying is, not in all cases, it's really difficult to only use direct perception because some things are known and felt and experienced but are difficult to quantify. And that's something that they've discussed here in the explanation, that not everything can be put into quantitative methods. And their experiences are difficult to justify even verbally. It's just so qualitative that it's difficult to put into words, let alone numbers. And so that's just something that they have been, talking about as either you can say a drawback of the modern methods of scientific receiving of information, or you can consider it as just a fact that they're stating that some things don't have a direct explanation as such, right? So they're saying that sometimes we are also inferring a lot of things about people's behaviors, personalities, and how they must be as people simply based on the way they conduct themselves, right? Simply based on the way that they appear, the way they speak, the way they say something. And this is like a universal intuition that we all have. And the way a particular person smiles or speaks or says something conveys certain subconscious information to us that is difficult to quantify and say, but we infer it. That, okay, they behaved like this, that means they must be this type of a person. We make categories, judgments, and like analysis of people all the time, but we can't always tell you accurately how we did that through direct sense perception, but we still do it through inference regardless, and we use it on an everyday basis. So that's what is being spoken about here as a second concept. And thirdly, the concept of linga and lingi is basically the different parts of a cognition process. So for example, when we see smoke on the hill, the smoke is categorized as the linga, and the hill where the smoke is present is the lingi. So these are all parts of our identification of knowledge process, where we are identifying that, okay, there is smoke, which is becoming our linga. It's a differentiating factor, something that's present and we can look at. And then we also know that it's present on a particular hill or a lingi or a particular subject, which means that, okay, there must be fire either near the hill, on the hill, or somewhere nearby. So all of these traits and characteristics that we can clearly see almost lead us to understand that a much bigger cause is creating these effects, right? So therefore, inference becomes a valid or a valuable form of gaining knowledge or inference through the presence of a linga or a lingi, which are like the indicating factors or parts that are an essential part of the cognition process. And so that's how we can perceive them. Then, of course, we have the entire theory of the reliable testimony, where we know that only if it is mentioned in Shruti texts or clearly defined in ancient Indian literature or Vedic texts, then we can take it as valid. And I'm sure that in different cultures, the text would be different. But in this case, because the cultural context is Vedic text, that therefore these have been taken as the highest form of knowledge. But I'm sure in different indigenous cultures, there must be some texts that each culture has of its own that could be similar in nature. But here we take it as Vedic texts. So that is also considered to be a reliable form of testimony and understanding. Now, for the purpose of this video, we are really summarizing this entire concept. But when we go into it in depth, which is the whole inference process has many, many layers, in fact, many different types. And it takes a little bit of time to understand. In fact, it takes a whole bunch of classes and deep explanation to wrap our minds around what is being said. So because this video is short and I'm trying to keep it as crisp as possible, I'm not able to go into it in as much depth with the names of the inference. But that is something that we do in our classes and our courses, because there I have the time, the ability to speak to you one-on-one and to take you through it the best I can. So just to let you know that there is a little bit more that needs to be mentioned and gone into, but for the purpose of this video, I am trying to keep it as easy to access as possible. At the same time, within the reliable testimony realm also, there are a couple more layers, but hopefully we can cover that in a future segment or in our classes and courses. So for now, I would say that is it for this particular fifth sutra of the Sankhya Karika, which has helped us to see how inference as well as valid testimony or apta vachanam can be used as reliable forms of perception and perceiving knowledge. I hope that this video has been helpful, and as always, I look forward to hearing from you, reading your emails and your comments. Please let us know your thoughts, and I look forward to connecting with you through our classes, links to which are in the description. Cannot wait to speak to you and see you soon, and until then, take care.